It's 1 o'clock, so we'll begin the Tax-Exempt Review Committee meeting for today. We have 4 items on the agenda. Number 1 is to approve the Tax-Exempt Review Committee meeting minutes of 10/26/21. We've had those, and if there are any changes or corrections, we'd love to hear that. Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Motion and a second. Any further comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same
Aye.
sign. Motion carries. Number 2, Woodrow pilot transfer. Jim, will you get us started?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whenever an already approved pilot transfers to another owner or operator, it has to also be approved by the city commission. We don't do the full reapproval process with the schools and county because that would have been either covered the first time or been not required at the time that it was first approved. Again, this is a sale of the property. The request is to simply leave the pilot in place so that would continue as it was approved before. So there's no new incentive. The project didn't change. It's strictly a change in the ownership. You know, when this happens with the Renaissance Zone, we don't have to go to the city commission for approval, but the way state law reads for pilots, we do. For Renaissance Zones and TIFs, we don't. So we're following the law and recommending approval of this transfer. We have representatives of Kilbourne Group are here. We may have the buyers online. I'm not sure they were able to get in, but I don't know, Bill, they're here if you have any questions.
If there's any comments or questions, it's basically a transfer. It doesn't change any of the terms or conditions. So if there's any comments or questions, otherwise we'll accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Motion and a second. Any other comments or corrections or changes? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 3, Mayor, it's a good thing you got here, man. We move fast around here, and we're on item number 3. Number 3, the renewal plan for the Kmart site. Jim.
I'm
just kidding.
Thank you. I don't know if we have someone here from Untitled yet. And I'll go through the development. This is the South University development, former Kmart site. Austin Morris just came in, and so I'll have him talk about it a little bit, but I'll just show it to you briefly. You can see the existing site is a vacant Kmart.
So Jim, can I ask you a question? So is the proposed senior housing project, is that part of this request, or is that a separate request?
It was a separate request that was already approved, but it is part of this development. If you were to not approve this tax increment district, that senior housing project would fail. It wouldn't be feasible. Maybe Austin, do you want to go through these slides real quick? We're moving along real quick today. So we'll have Austin talk briefly. I'll make a few comments, and then we have Matt Schlankenberg from PFM, our financial advisor, online available to walk through that financial report. Austin?
Okay. Austin Morris, Enclave Development. Excited about this project. It's been about 18 months in the making. There's a lot of hair on this site, but it is ideal from being sort of an example of what TIF was originally designed for. We have a blighted property, challenged property with sort of some interesting activity in the evening hours. And it's a large site, a big opportunity from both a corrective standpoint. How do we improve University Drive? How do we make this a catalyst to further redevelopment of parcels that have similar conditions? How do we provide opportunity for people from a retail perspective in an area that has significant retail demand? And also, how do we clean up the area and have it be sort of a robust example of what redevelopment should look like on this corridor. So here's a depiction of the overall site. We have the vacant Kmart building. Part of that portion of the vacant Kmart building post demo will be the senior apartments with Beyond Shelter. We have opportunities for retail along the University Drive corridor, and then inline retail in the center core with visibility on University Drive. Here's a rendering depiction of what would be the inline retail behind the pad sites. And we're already getting robust demand. University Drive doesn't have really vacant options for folks, so we have a lot of opportunities here from a retail standpoint to add value to all the neighbors around it with more neighborhood retail, which the closest neighborhood retail center would be north of this, about a mile and a half. Here's a general depiction of the site plan. We think that we can add a little bit more retail. That this is shown on the north portion of the center building right here, because we have more than enough parking. But you have Burger King pad site, could be a redevelopment, coffee shop, another retail pad site, car wash, and then a future office building or additional retail. And then this is a depiction of apartments to the west, which in this case, the site plan from Beyond Shelter looks different than this. It's an improved site plan in my opinion. And then the retention in back. Here's an example of some of the retail that we've done and the fit up examples that we've done. We want this to be a really nice A development in this corridor and be something that we're proud of and that the community can be proud of, and that helps catalyze University Drive redevelopment. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from anybody? I guess one is, so the current Burger King, then that would be going away, and then potentially they could come back, or can you talk a little bit, or would you rather
Yep.
not talk about that?
Well, I could talk about the existing circumstances. Burger King's in a lease. They opted to renew that lease on a very short-term basis because they want to evaluate plans for a brand new store. That store is old. It's been redeveloped a little bit, probably a decade ago, but it's probably about 30 years old. So my guess is in the next 2 to 5 years, we'll see some new situation there.
Can I ask one more? Just the whole question about the Beyond Shelter project is kind of a separate thing, but it's really a part of this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep, I can touch on that. So the depth of this site is was made for 70s big box. We don't see that today anymore, especially in cases where we have enough of the general big box stores throughout the community. So because of the depth of the site, what do you do on the west portion of the site? We struggled with that on how you'd incorporate multifamily housing, mixed use, et cetera, especially at the acquisition cost basis of the property. So the property is a $6 million property, which from a per square foot standpoint ends up being around $12 a foot for the entire property, which includes that depth, where traditionally that depth would be worth more like $5 or $6. So the only way that the project works from a acquisition and redevelopment standpoint for Beyond Shelter is if we can achieve a TIF that's appropriate on the remaining balance of property. And we talked with Dan Madler and their group on we'd really like to do this. We think this would be awesome for the community. This is a great location for it. And Beyond Shelter really liked it as an option because it would be the only 55 plus senior apartments from an affordable housing standpoint with, reasonably wide radius. So when we were running the numbers, the challenge is that selling that for X price versus what the retail sale price would be, the math doesn't add up. So we want to make it work for Beyond Shelter while making the redevelopment work.
Well, go ahead, Jim. But I just want to add real quickly, I want to thank you very much because, I mean, from the city's perspective, we have a real shortage of low-income senior housing. And so that is what we were hoping would happen. We didn't know that's what would happen at that location. But from our perspective, it's a great addition. And so thank you for doing that. And I do think the other thing, so what's the length of this TIF? Is there a defined number of years?
Yeah, the maximum number of years would be 15. However, there's also a maximum amount of benefit of 1.4 million to the developer plus 50,000 that they pay to the city for administration. So, if the development happens relatively quickly, if the values go up maybe a little bit more, it could end in 13 or 14 years. The way this is structured is there's one large TIF district that includes the entire site, but most of the TIF revenue will be on the eastern portion of the site that Enclave's developing, because you had previously approved a tax exemption for the low-income housing in order to make that feasible. So while the low-income housing is in the TIF, it will pay very little property taxes. There'll be a little increase on land. The low-income housing only works for them if they can buy a clean site, and so the developer will use most of the 1.4 million will be demolition and some stormwater facilities, but primarily it's cleaning up the site so that Beyond Shelter can buy it at a price that's affordable to them, so they can develop their project. And so the 1.4 million is probably about the most that will come up in 15 years. Again, it might be a little bit less. These things tend to pay off a little bit sooner. And next, if you don't have any more questions with me, what I'll do is I'll get Matt from PFM on here, and he'll walk through that report because he looked at the financial report and the feasibility of it.
Mayor Mahoney has a question.
Austin, I think when we first started, you had net value of what all this will be at the end. We had one figure and another figure. What is the net value you think when it's all done?
I believe it was around 30 million.
30 million?
Current assessed values, I believe around 4 million. Do you have that, Jim?
I think actually the portion that you will have will probably be a little over 10 million, but the low-income housing
Yeah.
is at least another 10, but again, that won't pay property taxes for that period of years where it's affordable housing.
And then when would I expect Kmart building to come down?
Starting December.
This year? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right now, the entire value of the site is probably around 3 million. I think the Burger King building's worth almost as much as the Kmart building was valued at by our city assessor, so it's not in the best shape.
I have a question on
Jim.
perhaps for Mr. Gilmore. I'm having a hard time understanding when we're calling the site blighted and distressed and in need of a TIF tax incentive. Help me understand what is unique about this site that it would qualify for a TIF, where generally as recently as last month's meeting, we were going to steer the TIF program more towards brownfield type of redevelopment sites, which this is not one, in my opinion. And I grew up in that neighborhood. I know the building well. I love the plan, no objection. But to me, it's a flat, wide open area that's beautifully served with public infrastructure. Access is fine. Water, sewer's there. It's flat. It's not an old industrial site. There's not an old industrial factory that we got to remediate. Help me understand why this would even be a good candidate for this program.
Maybe I can touch on the whole idea of the brownfield is that you have a site that you need to remove a lot of things to make it more of a greenfield site. If you go it on 64th Avenue South, you're not going to have to deal with a bunch of older asphalt. You're not going to deal with a building full of asbestos. You're not going to deal with those kind of conditions. And so most of this site is to get this back to a brownfield or more of a greenfield site rather than what we call brownfield site. And so, yeah, this is not a hazardous, waste site. That's what people sometimes think with brownfield, but really, vacant, obsolete buildings. There's people just aren't banging at the door to lease us out. Austin, maybe you can kind of go over some of the costs that you're looking at here. Many of this, it's above the average demolition cost when you're
It's
got a
on,
bunch of asbestos.
and Jim, that's on page 27 of our information, so thank you.
Yeah, so the challenge, if we were to buy this site as a greenfield and we were to pay the price that we're paying for it from acquisition cost basis, you'd be buying a $6 million site that would be relatively pad ready to start construction on. So without TIF, that would be feasible. With TIF, we have to spend upwards of, I think initial estimates were I gotta find my notes.
2.15.
2.15 million from building demolition abatement. We have a small environmental need, soil remediation, and then replacing some utilities, tearing up the parking lot because the parking lot is decades obsolete. So we're not just going to re-overlay the parking lot or anything. This whole thing needs to be demoed and redeveloped. On a greenfield site, we would eliminate all of that. So most of the TIFs that I've been involved in this municipality and others that are redevelopment, the site acquisition cost might look similar to what you buy a greenfield site, although I would argue this is more than that because the building is useful as it is. So the building's condition is bad, but we've gotten multiple requests over this period of time to lease the building as is and charge $8 a square foot in rent, maybe add a little lipstick to it. Financially, that would actually work out where you'd have self-storage in back, you'd have warehousing in back, maintain the retail, put some pad sites on front. So it's not impossible without TIF, but it is impossible without TIF to actually get a situation where you have a new development where it's in excess of $20 million of value and it feels good and it looks good and it's marketable to national tenants. In its current state with lipstick, that wouldn't be possible.
Any other comments or questions? And Jim, I don't know if you want to have the,
Yeah, why don't we have Matt from PFM walk through your report and your conclusions on it. Afternoon, Matt.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So as you know, I go through and put together this report. I put together my own analysis, my own independent analysis. I look at what rates would be, lease rental rates would be, and really dig in just to see if what they are proposing is appropriate. So we'll step through this report quickly. I think they've, Jim and Austin have gone through the purpose of this. They're going to redevelop this land. They're going to tear down the Kmart and sell off a portion of it. And then with the remaining property, which would owned by the developer, that'll include the retail, their casual dining, the existing Burger King, and looking at a coffee shop as well. Again, they're looking at 15 years, which that has also been said. So we'll move on to the assistance request. So the assistance request is $6.29 million, and that is obviously way more than can be generated with the TIF here. But I did still want to go through this. Policy 8 does restrict the TIF to just over 1.5 million. Jim mentioned earlier we're at 1.4 million, so that does meet policy 8. Now let's go through the return analysis. That's kind of the meat of this report. So, you know what? I also want to mention that the developer is including 25% equity in this project, to 25%. So this falls on the higher end of that, and that's about $3 million. And then they're looking at a couple of loans, 20 to 25 years, and they're estimating a 3.5% interest rate on those loans. All right, so for the analysis, as I mentioned, we looked to see if the revenues were reasonable. We have a subscription to CoStar, which we can look at retail prices in the Fargo area, and we determined that these are reasonable rates that they are looking to charge the tenants. Again, I put together our independent pro forma, and then we calculated an internal rate of return for both a 10 and a 15-year period. 10 for looking at an IRR, and then 15 because this goes through, this is a 15-year TIF. On a 10-year basis without TIF, there is a 10% IRR, and with TIF, there's just over a 13%. IRR. On this view, this is still certainly on the lower end of a redevelopment IRR. Easily expect to see 20 to even 25% for redevelopment on the internal rate of return. And then the other big thing here is we look at coverage. Typically, lenders like to see a minimum of 1.2 times debt service coverage. We're not hitting that here without assistance. We don't get that until year 15. And then I also want to note that we did run some sensitivity analyses to see if like a lower project cost or higher rents would help. And what it would take to get up to that, kind of a more reasonable 13+% IRR. Neither of those were really reasonable or likely, given the large amounts, the large movements that would need to occur to make the project viable without TIF. So our conclusion was that TIF would be needed for this project to be viable. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. And I guess on page 40, that basically the conclusion, that's what you say, that this project would not be feasible without this. And so I appreciate that. Any comments or questions about this? And I'll just give you my perspective. I think the most important thing is this is a brownfield, even though our definition is all of us have different perspectives on that. And to me, the key thing is to have this project with the low-income senior housing as part of this project is what really makes it a positive addition to our city. So that's my perspective. Any comments, Kent?
Yeah. I had a comment with regard to just the overall, the TIF eligible of 6.2 million. And then when you run it through our due diligence process, have the financial advisor look at it, run the rates of return, and you whittle it down to 1,450,000. That's 22% of what the potential ask is. So my comment is, it seems like our policies are working to make sure that the developers aren't being unjustly enriched and that the rate of returns are reasonable. Years ago, just from a point of history, we used to run these through the finance committee without doing the analytics, and it was much more subjective about how these got approved. I would suspect Mr. Cosgrove, who's sitting right next to me, might remember those days. But I feel like our process has been refined over the years. It's a good process. It's being vetted with professionals, and you're seeing the results in this analysis.
Any other comments or questions?
I should just note that it does meet our new policy, and as well as kind of conform to our old policy. This one's kind of going through in between those two, but it fits well with both of those policies.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations. Austin, can I ask you a quick question? So in St. Paul, they just voted for capping rent. It's rent controls. Will that influence you as far as choosing to develop in Fargo or St. Paul?
That's a great question. I expect that to be amended in some fashion, even though they say that it can't, because it'll be, when they say that it's the strictest in the nation, it is based on what was voted. And they're gonna have a challenge attracting any development efforts there. In states like California, you have 5% rent control, but you allow exemptions for certain project types. There is no opportunity currently with an exemption, so we're in the burbs, and we like being there. We think we do a really good job developing in the 44 other suburban metros. But we haven't had a project in Minneapolis or St. Paul. So, of course, we're monitoring it, but usually in order to continue the pipeline of supply, in order to keep rents at bay by having adequate supply of housing stock, rent control detracts from that. So we'll see, but.
Thank you, Austin. I apologize for putting you on the spot, but you're a smart guy and a developer, and I like having you here. That's why I like asking questions like that. Very good. We'll move on. The last item on the agenda is number 4. Jim.
Yes, the city commission authorized us to go out and get proposals for the development of 3 sites downtown. And we received multiple proposals on all of those sites. Several of them are asking for either TIF or pilot assistance. Others are asking for the Renaissance Zone. And so it wasn't a real, I think the best thing to do would be to have a joint meeting of this committee and the Renaissance Zone Authority to review those proposals and then make a recommendation to the city commission. I'll just show you briefly the 3 sites. This is one where our health department building used to be down here at 401 3rd Avenue. The reason I show the site to the north is that one of the proposals would, the redevelopment would be up here and the parking would be down here. And it's a little more complicated story than that. But so that's one of the proposals. We have 2 proposals on, again, this site, 401 3rd Avenue. Secondly, there's this, where the Park East Apartments used to be, this rough dotted blue line. That's a remnant of where the apartments used to go all the way down here. We have 3 proposals on this site, and so I'd like you to look at those. And then finally, this old school district warehouse site, we have 2 proposals on this site, and one of the proposals has 3 different options for that redevelopment. As I look at the proposals, it's not going to be an easy decision. There's a lot of good options to choose from. And so I'd like to organize a joint meeting of this committee and the Renaissance Zone Authority. Our next meeting isn't until 5 weeks out, and so I'm wondering if you'd be interested in participating in maybe a special meeting 3 weeks from now, if we could get the Renaissance Zone Authority to be available at the same time. I thought maybe we'd use the first meeting to just kind of walk through, discuss the proposals, and then have a follow-up meeting where we may interview or have meetings with the proposed developers of the other sites. I don't know if you want to interview them all. There's 7 proposals. That's probably a lot, but the ones that seem the highest, and then make a recommendation after that.
I think what we should do, how we should proceed, if this is okay with everybody, is this time of year, it's difficult to get everybody with schedules anyway. So maybe send out a survey with the combined groups and try to set a time and do it that way. And then also have the opportunity, if you need to call in or be on Zoom, but do it that way to check availability and to have both committees included, if that's okay. But it's just difficult this time of year, no matter how you do it. But if that's all right, that's how we'll proceed. Is that all right with everyone?
And then what I'll do is I'll send you all a link where you can download these these proposals. They're actually quite large documents, and so if you do want a hard copy, us to print some of them out, let me know, and I can get you a hard copy. But I think initially, if you could just look through them online, and that'll be available to the public also in sometime relatively soon.
Okay, that's how we'll proceed. So that's not an action item, but we'll just kind of work our way through and try to find an acceptable time for everybody. With that, it's 1:28. Thanks everybody for attending, and have a good afternoon. Happy Thanksgiving. We are adjourned.
Thank you.